Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is a deep dive into a pretty powerful collection of 10 habits. These are designed to help individuals move toward, well, a more aligned and authentic life. The practices proposed, they emphasize everything from physical movement and, organization to setting some really intentional boundaries against all that digital noise. The source material is certainly ambitious, promising long-lasting, profound change. So the core question we really need to wrestle with is this. What's the highest leverage input for achieving that kind of sustained personal growth? Does success fundamentally rely on establishing and maintaining, say, rigorous externally defined structure and discipline? Or does it hinge more on cultivating the internal skill, the flexibility and intuition needed to adapt that routine to one's, current physical and emotional state?
I'll be arguing for the primacy of that external structure and discipline. I see it as the non-negotiable foundation for any real change.
And I come at it from, a slightly different angle. I maintain that flexibility and that internal alignment, those are the highest leverage skills, because without the skill to adapt, even the most meticulously built structure, it just quickly becomes a constraint, doesn't it? Not a catalyst.
Okay, well, my core position is really built on the reality that long-lasting change requires building disciplinary integrity. The habits themselves, they seem designed to provide, as the material puts it, evidence of telling yourself you're going to do things and sticking to them. If you want to evolve, you fundamentally need to trust yourself to follow through. And this is achieved, I believe, by creating structures that reduce cognitive load and, importantly, protect your most valuable resource, your attention. Take habit 2, the no phone rule. It really exemplifies this. By using tools that enforce do not disturb for the first and last hours of the day, you establish a crucial structural barrier. Now, this isn't about ignoring your intuition. It's actually about preventing that frantic, reactive dopamine hit energy from hijacking your initial waking state. You're conserving energy and attention, giving yourself the quiet mental space needed to operate from intention, not just constant distraction. And furthermore, organization, that's habit 3, it provides the external clarity that's just required for peace of mind. When the speaker notes that if things are scrambled in your head, they're going to be scrambled in your reality, they're really emphasizing the need to offload that mental clutter. So using tools like calendar aggregation, seamless scheduling software, that provides organizational rigor. And critically, habit 5, dedicating a planning day, ensures these structures actually survive the inevitable chaos of the work week. You plan meetings, you organize groceries. This kind of structural preparation protects the core non-negotiables when, unexpected deadlines inevitably hit.
That's an interesting point, the idea that structure is purely protective. However, I would frame structure as merely a support system. It supports the ultimate goal, which has to be authentic alignment. And if the system we build causes us to feel, as the material warns, handcuffed or like a slave to the routine, well then we've kind of failed the mission, haven't we? So the skill of knowing when and how to adapt that structure, flexibility, that for me is therefore the most profound habit. The material itself actually makes this explicit in habit 10. Flexibility. It's presented as the foundational skill allowing you to move with the inevitable shifts and challenges that form life. Now, this isn't an excuse to just quit when things get tough. It's the skill of informed adaptation. For instance, realizing you're physically depleted and making the conscious choice to switch a high-intensity gym session to, say, a gentle walk. Or if you wake up feeling utterly unaligned, maybe postponing a key output like a recording block, because trying to force alignment when you feel scattered, it just results in inauthentic, subpar output, right? Which totally undermines the entire effort. And to achieve that kind of informed adaptation, internal awareness is, it's paramount. Habit 7, the mindful habit, things like meditation or journaling, this is required to really establish where things are at. If you're not actively plugged into your own thoughts and mindset through some kind of distraction-free reflection, you're essentially building and adhering to a rigid system based on, frankly, assumptions about your own state. Without that internal diagnostic tool, structure is just guesswork. And even the necessity of dedicated open space, habit 9, that demonstrates that the routine must intentionally incorporate freedom, simply to regulate emotional energy.
I see why you think that internal sensitivity is the highest lever. I do. But let me offer a different perspective on the actual mechanism of discipline. You can't just wait for alignment to strike before you act. That mind-body connection, habit 1, movement, it's primarily built through the discipline of showing up. That's what generates the self-trust needed for future growth. The non-negotiable commitment, that's the fuel. I mean, consider how we protect our health in relationships. Habit 8 frames these as garden beds, right? Needing consistent sun and water. Discipline is the act of providing that consistency, whether you feel like it in the moment or not. The consistency of preparing your own food, for example, habit 4, ensures energy stability. It prevents that midday crash that would derail the routine later on. So if we constantly defer to intuition, we risk substituting genuine alignment with, well, maybe just comfort seeking, sacrificing the slow, cumulative progress that a non-negotiable structure provides. Discipline, I'd argue, is the engine that generates the capacity for alignment in the first place.
I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that the cost of that kind of rigid adherence is worth the perceived gain in self-trust. If the goal is genuinely self-improvement, then forcing a non-negotiable when you are genuinely depleted, physically or emotionally, that feels like an act of inauthenticity. It risks, as the material suggests, going against my intuitive nature merely for the sake of ticking things off my to-do list. And that is the exact moment structure becomes punitive, not supportive. When we talk about habit 10, flexibility, we're really talking about resilience. A system that's too rigid, it will inevitably break. It often leads to total abandonment, maybe even behavioral rebellion against the whole structure. A flexible system, on the other hand, one that's informed by the mindfulness of habit 7, it bends instead of breaks.
It allows me to recognize that, okay, forcing a 2-hour recording session when my attention is totally fractured is actually less productive than maybe taking a low-impact walk, returning later, and completing the task authentically in, say, 30 minutes. That kind of informed adaptation that isn't comfort-seeking, it's optimized energy management.
Okay, but optimized energy management, that's only really possible, isn't it, when the structural framework has already removed the major sources of friction? Let's just circle back to the no-phone rule for a second. You describe rigidity, but I describe protection. That structural barrier is essential because, look, if you wake up and instantly jump into checking notifications, your attention is fragmented from the get-go, and you've immediately ceded control of your day to external demands. You end up operating from a constant state of maybe mild crisis. Discipline puts you in a slow, neutral, grounded state before those demands even begin. And furthermore, the flexibility you champion, well, it can easily become a justification for procrastination if that foundation of organization isn't solid. If you haven't meticulously planned your week on Sunday, like in Habit 5, then that decision to postpone a recording block due to lack of alignment, well, it might actually be because you're secretly worried about the 5 urgent tasks you haven't scheduled yet. Structure reduces that mental friction, freeing up your intuitive capacity to focus on genuine emotional states, not just, hidden logistical fears.
I agree that disorganization can definitely mask fear. Yeah. But excessive planning, that creates its own form of cognitive exhaustion. You describe organization as providing the luxury of open space. I'd argue that the open space itself, specifically the no agenda time mentioned in Habit 9, must be viewed not as some luxury or a residual gap, but as a non-negotiable input for emotional health. I mean, if we're striving to make our time conducive to who you want to be, literally 24/7, we're creating a kind of hyper-vigilant environment where every single moment is judged against a priority list. Habit 9 is the intentional counterbalance. It grants that necessary emotional release. It's maybe a sacred 2-hour block, perhaps on a Sunday afternoon, to just spontaneously scroll or binge a show or simply exist without the mental burden of constant prioritization. It's the release valve, really, that prevents the entire system from building up too much pressure and eventually exploding. We have to prioritize this freedom. Structure should be the framework that holds the freedom, not the goal itself.
But if we acknowledge the value of vetting time, In prioritizing non-negotiables versus wants, as suggested in Habit 8, then organization is what determines whether your open time is, let's say, productive freedom or simply unstructured chaos. If you are disorganized and scattered, if the basic logistics aren't handled, you simply can't afford 2 guilt-free hours of no agenda time. You just can't. The comfort and the peace of mind you gain from dedicating Sunday to planning, Habit 5, that's the critical enabler. If I know my meetings are scheduled across time zones, my core habits are blocked out, my meals are prepped, then when Monday morning hits, I actually have the capacity to recognize a genuine moment of depletion and maybe adapt my workout without completely derailing the subsequent 5 hours of planned output. Organization, I still believe, precedes the capacity for truly productive flexibility.
The problem, conceptually, might be where we place the hierarchy of importance. You seem to place structure right at the top, dictating capacity. I place internal awareness at the top, dictating authenticity. If you haven't used Habit 7 to really plug in and reflect on where you truly are, then the entire structure you build on Sunday Habit 5, well, it could be built on assumptions about who you think you should be. And that can lead to goals that are fundamentally disconnected from your actual energy levels and your deep desires. And that's the danger of becoming, as the material puts it, landlocked in by a rigid schedule. The flexibility skill is what allows us to switch dynamically between the non-negotiables and the wants, ensuring that our efforts align with our emotional reality day to day. If we prioritize adherence over authenticity, we are simply training ourselves to follow orders, not really training ourselves to grow intuitively.
My contention remains that while flexibility is, yes, a critical skill for navigating life's inevitable shifts, the engine that drives sustainable progress is the consistent, intentional execution of structured habits, controlling external inputs like phone access, meticulously organizing time, upholding clear non-negotiables. These are the acts that build the foundational discipline. And this discipline, it creates the reliable capacity needed for aligned change, giving us the safety net, if you will, to evolve constantly, which I think we both agree is a lifelong pursuit.
And I would reiterate that self-improvement is indeed a lifelong pursuit. Absolutely. But the ultimate measure of success for me is not how well we adhere to a list, but developing that highly intuitive skill of flexibility. This skill ensures that the structures we build remain relevant, responsive, and genuinely supportive, rather than eventually becoming obstacles to genuine growth and, crucially, emotional well-being. It is the ability to adapt that prevents the system itself from becoming just another source of stress.
We have certainly illuminated two distinct yet crucial elements within this suggested list of habits today: the undeniable need for reliable structure and the equal need for responsive adaptation.
Indeed. It really leaves the listener, I think, to reflect deeply on the material and determine the optimal, very personal balance between that unyielding commitment on one hand and intuitive adaptability on the other, in their own pursuit of growth.